Would you consider yourself emotional?
Yeah. I mean, probably.
So
I think I have emotions.
Got it. Because a lot of the times, at least in my experience, like and what I've seen, people that are nihilists, it's easy to, that's like an easy out. If something bad happens, if something good happens, it's just like, oh yeah, that's fine. Sweep it under the rug. It's not like it matters anyways. Something bad happens. And it's not like you actually deal with or process whatever, event or action occurred that make you felt that emotion.
If we believe that we have to, like, why should we?
Why should you feel that emotion?
Like, why should we process a traumatic event? Like, what does that mean?
Well, I do believe that there are things in your brain biologically that if they are deprived of something or there's like some bad traumatic event or something that will affect your biological.
Traumatic versus non-traumatic.
I mean, I feel like the definition of the word trauma would probably.
But what would be the line between let's give an example of something terrible, right? Actually not, because it's a podcast and people might hate on Graham. So let's just say something bad happens that we describe as bad in this culture, right? In another culture, that might not be bad. It's trauma in this culture. It's not trauma in this culture. So if the circumstance is the same, why was it traumatic?
Circumstances weren't the same.
Why not?
Because the culture.
The facts were the same. What we describe the facts as changed, which means that we can choose to call something trauma.
But doesn't it make sense that people would be built up due to culture and environment?
40-year-old guy sleeps with a 15-year-old girl. Terrible, right? Rewind 200 years. 40-year-old guy sleeps with a 15-year-old girl. 100% normal, right? How is it trauma now and not trauma then? And mind you, this is not my statement. You have to pull an extreme example if we're going to talk about trauma to illustrate the concept, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's traumatic in one instance and not traumatic in another, then it means that we can basically change the cultural narrative that we're ascribing to our context and make it not traumatic.
That makes sense.
Right. Which means it didn't matter. Which means the only thing that matters is that you chose to make it meaningful.
But let's say like the passing of a parent or like a loved 100%. One or something like that.
If we think we feel like we have a narrative that says, if I don't mourn, it means I didn't care about them, right? Mm-hmm. That's a statement of belief. I could say that if I don't mourn about them, it means I totally cared about them. Why does my mourning have any indication of how much I cared? They're non-correlates, right? But it's just because we have so many of these belief statements that quote society or things that we inherit, right? But we just choose to say that this is how life is. And so I think it's just monitoring what those statements are. And so one of my favorite sayings, probably if I had one thing on my tombstone, it would be a permutation of a quote by Orson Scott Card, which is, we question all of our beliefs except for those that we truly believe and those we never think to question.
That's a good quote.
Right. Yeah. And so it's of course I'm opening to questioning my beliefs. It's what's trauma? When someone's I was traumatized, it's were you? Or do you just choose to label it as trauma and then now you fucked up the rest of your life because you call it trauma when 200 years ago it was life? And 1,000 years ago, having your parent killed in front of you was just nature, if you want to go biology, right? And so we're just we just choose to create meaning around things. And so at the end of the day, end to end to end, bottom, root.
Yeah.
All our brains do is just create and destroy meaning. And so we say, this is a threat, this is not a threat. We make we need to reinforce this behavior, we don't need to reinforce this behavior, all through meaning. Mm-hmm. And so if you can control what you deem meaningful, you can massively shift the odds in your favor because you don't need to ascribe meaning to.
Well, couldn't that be, let's say like 500 years ago, you see a parent killed in front of you.
Yeah.
Isn't that because all you have in your mind is food, shelter, water?
Sure. And
now that we have those things taken care of, our minds go to other places.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just don't think it changes the actual facts. So it's there's stimulus response, right? And so we get to control the response, we control the stimulus. And so was it it's either Seneca or Epictetus who's no one yells at a rock, right? And so it's if you are the rock, then it doesn't matter, right? Like you just like eventually like people just fuck off and just leave you alone. And so like, and if you see stimulus of life that way in terms of like how you deem things or label things traumatic or not traumatic or good or bad, you know what I mean? It's the same thing with, I'm sure with like the hate comments and whatnot. Is like if you deem the comments of the fans as meaningful, then you will both care about them being positive and you will care about them being negative. But if they're not meaningful at all to begin with, then like I don't think you can do either. I think you just either have to participate in both sides or you remove. That is also a belief statement, right? So like maybe you can. So, you know, interesting thoughts.